Vladimir Putin was badly set up by his own propagandists. Both Russian experts and analysts insist that it's hard to call this just a mistake. Rather, it's a deliberate act of sabotage meant to portray Vladimir Putin as sick, frail, and weak. On the night of March 8th, the Kremlin press service published an unedited version of Vladimir Putin's video address to Russian women, in which he reads the congratulatory message twice, and he complains about a scratchy throat. Then, for almost a minute, he coughs and, nearly chokes. And now Russian propagandists suddenly began to claim that such a publication cannot be called an accident, since the entire Kremlin pool of journalists would never have allowed such a blunder. So this is more likely a rebellion and an attempt to portray Putin as weak and aging. Moreover, just recently, polls showed that the level of trust Russians have in Vladimir Putin has dropped to its lowest point since the start of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. Only 32% of surveyed Russians mentioned Putin in response to the question of whom they would trust to make important state decisions. Can you imagine 70% say that anyone but Putin? Moreover, it turned out that the share of those who support continuing the war against Ukraine has already dropped to 24%. Again, this is the lowest point since the start of the full-scale war. But at the same time, as we know, Putin and his circle say, no, we keep fighting, let Russian Ivans go and die, we don't care about Ukraine, the war goes on. That's why the Kremlin allows for this kind of quiet rebellion and even sabotage against Vladimir Putin. My name is Alexei Pechi, let's discuss this topic together. But before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, leave any comment you want, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, now let's go through everything step by step. The Kremlin press service published an unedited version of the video on the eve of March 8th. Vladimir Putin's address to women, Russian women, in which Putin reads the congratulatory message twice and complains about a tickle in his throat. Well, actually there's nothing particularly extraordinary about this, but not for a dictator. Because a dictator has to be perfect, he has to be infallible, he has to be someone who's just like an Iron Man. So, in the video, which is 6 minutes and 19 seconds long, Vladimir Putin first addresses the audience. He completely delivers the congratulatory message to women, and then at the end of the 3rd minute asks to re-record everything. And he says, quote, "You know, let me say it again, because my throat was scratchy, I almost started coughing." At the same time, for about 30 seconds, Vladimir Putin actually coughs more than 10 times, and it's clear that he's really not feeling well, and it's obviously not just a scratchy throat. Thank you.
Yes, you know.
Let me say it again.
Because my throat was scratchy.
My throat was scratchy.
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you.
I almost started coughing. I've talked a lot today.
Should I bring it? No.
Let's do it.
Let's get to work. Dear women, I am sincerely glad to congratulate you on International Women's.
As a result, this video stayed on the Telegram channel, the official Kremlin Telegram channel, for 4 minutes now. Here's the most interesting part. Well, first of all, 4 minutes is more than enough time for anyone who wants to download it. And the second point, let me remind you that in Russia they decided to block and shut down Telegram, claiming that, oh no, Telegram doesn't share information about Russia with the FSB about Russian citizens. And Vladimir Putin urged all Russians to switch to the Max Messenger. But for some reason, Putin's video addresses are still being published on the Kremlin's Telegram channel. There you go. After this video stayed on the Telegram channel for 4 minutes, it was deleted and replaced with an edited version where Putin doesn't cough. The original video was reposted and almost immediately deleted by the Telegram channel of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. In addition, this unedited video was posted by, the propaganda outlet Ryadovka. However, they soon deleted it as well. In short, this entire propaganda machine of Putin basically knowingly published a real embarrassment for Vladimir Putin, which shows that the old man is clearly getting weaker. He looks unhealthy. He, is not just coughing, but seems to have some serious health problems. And now propagandists in Russia have suddenly started spreading the idea that this video leak didn't happen by accident. Let me explain one thing here. I mean, for an ordinary person, okay, that's absolutely normal. You cough, maybe your throat really just got scratchy. They really did reshoot the video, and supposedly there's no problem with that. But dictators like Vladimir Putin are made in such a way that they have to be flawless. And if the people start to doubt the dictator's health or certain abilities, that's the biggest nightmare for him. That's why now the so-called Z military correspondents have started saying that those who work with the Kremlin, journalists, they know that all videos of the Russian dictator are checked 100 times. And, well, it's just impossible to imagine that someone would accidentally publish a video online where Putin coughs. They say it's more like an act of sabotage or even rebellion, the goal of which is to show that the leader is weak, that the leader is sick, and his ratings are dropping. Maybe it's not just a coincidence. And if we assume that this really is an act of sabotage or rebellion, then information comes up by itself that would have been hard to imagine just a year ago. As it became known, according to data from an open poll by VT Siom, the level of trust Russians have in Vladimir Putin dropped to its lowest point since the start of the full-scale war against Ukraine, as of February 2026. Only 32% of respondents mentioned Vladimir Putin in response to the question of whom they would trust to solve important state issues. The highest value of this indicator was recorded in March 2024. At that time, 50% of Russians said that only Vladimir Putin should solve important state issues. Since then, the level of trust is about 1.5 times lower. At the same time, the results of a closed survey in which respondents were asked to separately assess the level of trust in each of the politicians on the list show a different picture. Here, Russia cannot be understood with the mind. According to this data, 77.5% of respondents trust Putin. This is the total share of answers definitely trust and tend to trust. At the end of December 2025, this figure was 81%. Next, in terms of trust, are Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, Deputy Chairman of the Security Council, and Russia's main drunkard Dmitry Medvedev, CPRF leader Zhuganov, head of A Just Russia Sergei Mironov, LDPR leader Slutsky, and the head of the New People faction Alexei Nechayev. But it's important to note here that the decline in public interest in Vladimir Putin himself is also recorded by the statistics of views on the Russian language Wikipedia. This is an interesting point. So, in those polls, yes, frightened Russians might say, oh, of course, we trust Putin. But here, suddenly, the interest in Wikipedia dropped a lot, like people didn't even bother to Google or look up any information about Putin. By the end of 2025, Putin lost in popularity to the drug addict and rapper Pasha Technik, who died of an overdose. The number of views on Putin's page dropped by almost half. Well, and as Vitsayom claims, in the summer of 2025, public sentiment was influenced by a number of internal factors. In particular, the sharp increase in utility tariffs, mass internet outages, and the fading hopes for a possible agreement on Ukraine were accompanied by a decline in support for the authorities. But there is also another important indicator from these sociological surveys. In February 2026, the share of those supporting the continuation of Russia's war against Ukraine dropped to 24%. This is the lowest point. First, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. At the same time, the share of Russians in favor of negotiations has risen to its highest point. In particular, 67% of Russians expressed support for the peace process. Interestingly, supporters of peace negotiations prevail among women, young people under 25, less affluent citizens, and rural residents. Because it is from there, first and foremost, that Russian vankas are sent to die in Ukraine. At the same time, surveys have shown that fewer and fewer Russians are following the news about the course of Russia's war against Ukraine. In February 2026, there were 44% like that. Surveys also showed that the prolonged war and its economic consequences are creating a persistent sense of hard times among Russians. 64% of citizens of the Russian Federation rated 2025 negatively for the country. But, as is well known, the entire Putin elite doesn't care at all about its own citizens. Like, who are these Russians? Who are these savages? They just don't care about them at all. There you go. Will we raise taxes? Yes, we will. All of Putin's elite wants the war to continue, and they will do everything to make sure there are resources to keep this war going. They couldn't care less about those Russian vankas. Well, so what if 10 or 100 Russian vankas die? Honestly, they don't give a damn, excuse me. That's why Russian propagandists saw this publication of the shameful video about Vladimir Putin as a provocation and even sabotage. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Thank you all. Goodbye, everyone.